Hey everyone, this is Tom Healy, co-host of the Payoff. And before we get started, I just wanted to take a minute and talk about Rick Bogner, who many of you probably know passed away suddenly. We just heard about it over the weekend. It was sudden. He was only 49 years old. As of now, we don't know what the cause of death was. We had already planned on doing this episode in conjunction with some promos that JR was doing back in September of 1996. We wanted to go ahead and still post this as a small tribute to Rick. He was a really, really nice guy, universally liked in the wrestling business. We had a tremendous experience with him when we recorded some matches with him back in July. To the best of my knowledge, this is the last public interview that he did. We're trying to reach out to his family to get them the audio and video. It's almost 2 hours worth of matches and discussion, and him and I just got off on some tangents in between matches because he was doing a lot of motivational speaking and different things, and that's something that I've done for a long time as well, and shared with him some ideas for his business. And the plan was for us to continue communicating about that, and I'd mentioned some ways I might be able to help him create some of his content online, which I help a lot of speakers with. And so we just had this really great conversation, and it was also pretty nice too because this was actually the first interview that we did with a wrestler. So Jeff and I created this concept, and we weren't really sure if it was going to work and logistically how we were going to match or watch these matches with wrestlers and, all this stuff. And so it was a little extra anxiety for the first one because we were, making sure the technology worked and making sure that, the video conference and all that stuff. And Rick was just such a nice guy and so generous with his time. And we just, like I said, had this great conversation. And, I obviously remembered the work that he did in WWE as a kid, so really enjoyed the conversation with him, and it was couldn't have asked for a nicer, classier person to do that first interview with, and it really solidified my passion for the Payoff in this podcast because, so many of these wrestlers just, they're great people that have great stories, and it's just fascinating to learn more about them. And as you can tell with our interviews, we try to get to know the person, and we try to get to know stuff about their lives and outside the ring, and we talk about their legacy, and so it's been great meeting these people. And again, Rick was just one of the nicest, classiest, generous people with his time and his stories. And so we'll make sure that in addition to this match and interview, we'll make sure to get all of his stuff out there eventually. But again, I just wanted to acknowledge really, how great he was with us and how it was just really interesting because it was that first interview that we did. And we believe, it's the last interview he did as well. So, again, I'm really proud of the conversation, and I hope that, folks listening can hear what a really nice, genuine, sweet, interesting person that Rick was. For those that may not know much about his career, I just wanted to share a little bit about him. He wrestled in Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling from 1988 until 1994. Really entertaining, great stuff that he did over there, so definitely go check it out. One thing in particular that I know he was really proud of and we discussed was his time working both with and against the Gladiator, who many of you know better as Mike Awesome, another guy that we lost too soon. But he was really proud of that FMW stuff, those matches, especially his work with the Gladiator, Mike Awesome. As many of you know as well, he would find his way into the World Wrestling Federation in 96 and then into 1997 as he liked to call it, the second Razor Ramon as opposed to the fake Razor Ramon. So we tried to work that into the podcast, and I know that he didn't love the term fake, so we'll certainly call it the second. But he had an interesting little situation that obviously we get into in the podcast there. But again, he was big, he was athletic, and I would have loved to have seen him with something other than an imposter gimmick, because obviously his work as a public speaker and his work in Japan, it was really good. And so it's just one of those guys who I think with a different character and maybe a different time, I think would have been a big star here in the United States. He would find his way back to Japan, working with New Japan Pro Wrestling, 1997 through 2000. Interestingly enough, he was a member of the NWO Japanese faction over there. And he would wrestle his last match in 1999 on April 23rd. Some serious neck injuries would end his wrestling career. As I mentioned, he became a motivational speaker and was doing workshops and speaking, and go find some of his stuff on the internet or at his website ricktitan.com. He was really good at it, and I think he had great stories to tell. I would have loved to have seen him write a book about just his life, just a great guy that really helped a lot of people and had this incredible second career. And so I know he was really proud of the work he did and the people he helped, and you could tell he was excellent at it, and didn't look anything like the imposter Razor Ramon, clean shaven, short hair, and up there speaking. And I thought that was really interesting. Both him and Mark Marrow have gone on to have these great speaking careers. We're going to hopefully be able to share the video of the interview with his family. We're going to reach out this week and hopefully get that to them, something that they can hopefully enjoy, because again, we talked about his career, his life, his speaking, what he did after wrestling, how he wanted to be remembered by fans, his legacy, and really just a great conversation. Again, one of these guys that you didn't really hear anything bad about. His partner in crime with the fake Razor and fake Diesel, Glenn Jacobs, he would write on Twitter, sorry to hear about the passing of Rick Bogner. After his wrestling career, best known for his runs in Japan, Rick became a very successful life coach and speaker, helping people work through life's difficulties and find inner peace. Rest in peace. Chris Jericho also had a really nice tribute. He would say on Instagram, sorry to hear about the passing of my old friend, Rick, today. Rick was a constant opponent, friend from the first month I moved to Calgary in 1990, all the way until him and Lance Storm, worked for War in Japan in 1995. He ended up in WWE's The Fake Razor Ramon and then became a motivational speaker. He was a funny guy who did great impressions and a literal giant in the ring. I last saw him before a Fozzy gig in Calgary a few years ago, and it was great to reconnect and catch up. 49 is way too young to pass away, but I always remember his big smile and drinking Chewy, I could be pronouncing that wrong, with he and Dr. Luther while singing karaoke in Japan. God bless you, Rick. So, again, just wanted to share some of the kind words that came in. Before we get to the episode, in closing, I just want to reiterate my thanks to him for being the first interview that we did, for having such a great conversation. Throughout that conversation and as it finished, I knew that there was going to be a lot of enjoyment that came out of this podcast for us, and hopefully for those of you listening as well, because of the conversations, right? So I was like, all right, we're on to something here. And so just how nice Rick was, how generous he was, how great the interview went, it just made me really feel good about what we were doing. And really one of the big things is allowing someone like him to connect with all of you and to, share about himself and about some of his proud moments in his professional wrestling career and what he's done as a person and his life. And so I hope that if nothing else, we can be a vehicle for guys like him to maybe share some things that you didn't know or you had never heard. And, so if you don't know much about Rick, go look at some of the stuff that he did, both as a professional wrestler and as a motivational speaker. But again, I just want to say thank you for what he did for us and all the people that he helped professionally. Just a fantastic person. And so it's horrible that we have to have this conversation and share the news for those of you that didn't know or discuss it. But I feel that the best thing we can do is air this, and hopefully you all learn something about Rick. You see what a great person he was. Maybe you have some time to stumble through some of the other work that he did, on YouTube. And again, I hope you enjoy this. I hope you enjoy learning more about Rick. We obviously have some laughs throughout the show, both with him and then before and after, about this fake Razor Ramon, or as he liked to say, second Razor Ramon. But again, it's obviously all in good fun. And again, I'll say it. Great man, great life, did a lot of good, universally liked by the people that knew him. And we appreciate, him coming on the show and sharing what he did. So we hope you enjoy the show. We appreciate you downloading this and obviously supporting the Payoff. And again, allowing great people like Rick Bogner to share their story with all of you. Thank you so much and enjoy the episode.
All right, here we go. It's Tag Team Championship action coming at you. I cannot believe that these people in this arena are booing these two men. Why would they boo two fine, young, upstanding athletes, two fine young men?
McMahon, you don't want to tell them what they did a while ago when they announced Jim Ross's name, do you?
Go ahead, King.
Ross, they even booed you.
I don't believe that, King. I want to see the tape of that. Why would anybody boo good old JR? Beyond me. Yeah, there he is. All these boys need a little leadership, just like I said before. They stick to their game plan, and they've done a good game plan. It's rock solid. They stick to their game plan. We'll have their tag champions right here tonight. They just got to focus and concentrate.
Ladies and gentlemen, pay attention. This is your boy, the Coach, from the WWE. I would like to welcome you to the very first wrestling podcast in the world to take you on a weekly deep dive into classic matches along with legends of the squared circle. Enjoy the discussion. Enjoy the back and forth. There's so much to get into. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Payoff.
Hey, yo, this is Tom Healy, and as always, I am joined by my co-host, Jeffrey Ryan. Jeff, we always like to say we cover famous matches and infamous matches. Today, we get to cover one of the most infamous situations in wrestling history, that's for sure. But first, how the hell are you doing?
Yeah, I've always liked Big Daddy Cool. I've always liked Razor Ramon, but I am talking about the original Diesel and Razor and not who we are covering today on the Payoff, Fake Razor and Fake Diesel. So it's almost too crazy to not cover this story at some point because it really is insane just what was presented to the fans of the WWF universe at the time. Friendly reminder before we get started, of course, subscribe to the Payoff, give us those 5 stars, spread the word about the show. We appreciate everyone that has up to this point. You can always find the Payoff. It's on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, just at Payoff Pod. We are always out there. We are always kind of checking our messages and responding to things. Of course, to Patreon, just one tier, PayoffPatreon.com. We got the after show. We have a bonus episode this month, just discussions on big pay-per-views and wrestling events, just all kinds of good stuff. So PayoffPatreon.com. Tom, what else do you have to share with those listening?
Just a big thank you to everyone that's listening. Can't do it without you. And if you're new to the show, make sure to check out the archives. We have the formation of the New Age Outlaws, the Hart Foundation, the Miz debuting, Raven leaving ECW, Shane throwing down the NWA title, and so much more. Check them all out. They're awesome. Jeff, tell everyone how we do things here on the Payoff.
Yeah, brief rundown for those new to the program or just that quick refresher. Deep dive into a match every Monday. And each episode has 3 major parts: the build, the payoff, the aftermath. We talk about what happened before the match. We talk about the match or career with our superstar guest. And then, what happened after the match. And we share a few reviews, write-ups, and then share our payoff scores to close it out. We always have good stuff. But with that, Tom, I know you are excited. So why did you want to discuss this match?
Yeah, look, in the history of the wrestling business, one of 2 people ever been brought in to replace and replicate characters who were just recently major stars. This isn't like a new Doink or Sin Cara, with all due respect, but we're talking about a former world champion, a former Intercontinental champion, both of whom were huge stars, now being portrayed by 2 new guys. So the whole situation was just so over the top ridiculous, okay? This isn't long after the jump and the NWO is going on, and it's just crazy. But initially, I remember being genuinely interested. And in fact, it was the only time I actually ever called the WWF 900 line to get the scoop on what I thought as a kid was Razor Ramon and Diesel coming back, according to Jim Ross. So again, I know we're not covering a 5-star classic this week, but we're covering a pretty wild story that has a lot of interesting moving pieces. So for that reason, I'm really looking forward to digging into the WWF's response to Hall and Nash leaving the WWF by deciding to roll out these 2 new characters with the same gimmick. So throw in the intrigue of the Monday Night Wars, plus who the second Diesel would eventually become, and just everything else involved in this. And I think it's a hell of a story, Jeff. So I'm looking forward to telling it. Why'd you want to do this one?
Yeah, you hit it on the head. I'm sure our payoff scores will, reflect later how we feel about this match, but the behind the scenes and just how this was presented to us as fans is insane. This couldn't ever fly in today's business, but even in 1996, this was a stretch for people to believe, and WWF did it anyways. I fully understand that when I say that too, it's incredibly ironic when we are seeing a supernatural Undertaker every week is more believable than this, but that's wrestling for you sometimes. So I knew the story of fake Razor happening, of course, but had never looked into the man himself, Rick Bogner's career. So I'm actually excited to share that a little bit with everyone and pumped to get going on that. So with that being said, let's get to the build.
Ho! It's time for the build.
All right, here we are with the build. It's in your house, 12. The tagline on this is, "It's time." The reason for "It's time" was that's Vader's catchphrase. Now, he was injured and not really delivering as he had the hopes were by management, which I'll get into in a second. But originally, I think they had big plans for him at this show. And because they were creating posters and pay-per-view ads months in advance, they had given him this tagline, thinking he'd be a prominent part of the event. This would take place on December 15th, 1996. So we're at the tail end of 96, headed into 97, which, as we've covered on past episodes, was a hell of a year for the WWF. West Palm Beach Auditorium in, you guessed it, West Palm Beach, Florida. Attendance of 5,708. So running a relatively small building, certainly nothing that we'd probably see today at a WWF pay-per-view, but interesting nonetheless. So this is one of those shorter pay-per-views. There wasn't a ton that happened on the actual show. The main event would be the newly crowned champion who had just beaten Shawn Michaels at Survivor Series, Psycho Sid, defeating Bret Hart in a 17-minute match. So they're really positioning Sid as a monster and getting a win over
Bret Hart. A couple dark matches that we're going to get into here in a second. And the match we're going to cover was the second match on the show. But here's what I found interesting about this card, Jeff, is a couple things. First of all, this spot that Sid had, the speculation is that it was supposed to be Vader. So SummerSlam 96, Vader and Shawn Michaels, it just wasn't the match that I think people thought. And so what they had envisioned being, maybe like a 3-match series between Vader and Shawn, the feud just kind of ended. And so the original idea was Vader ends up winning at Survivor Series in New York City and then loses the title back to Shawn in San Antonio at the Big Dome show at Royal Rumble. So that gets changed, and we end up with Sid taking that Madison Square Garden Survivor Series spot. Odd that he actually got cheered as he beat Shawn Michaels, but they're setting up that 97 Royal Rumble in San Antonio with Shawn winning it back. So ultimately, we wouldn't get much more Shawn that year as he'd eventually lose his smile, which would then blow up the WrestleMania plans. And we'd ultimately get Undertaker beating Sid at WrestleMania 13. But then we also got the Bret Austin match, the double turn submission match that probably would have never happened if Shawn had been healthy and with smile. So that's going on. Now, in the main event, we had Shawn Michaels on commentary, which was always a treat around this era. A couple good lines from him about Sid. He would say, Sid is the WWF's most expensive piece of luggage because we've got guys like me and other WWF stars who have to carry him here and carry him there. Without us, he's a zero. About Bret Hart, Shawn would say, we're all different individuals. Am I the only one in the WWF who has that figured out? Can we all be different, or do we all have to be vanilla and boring like Bret? God forbid me smile once in a while, or we have an emotion here or there. It's called real life, folks. Get to know it. So it makes me wonder, man, if Shawn and Bret had been able to get along and both been healthy, what that feud may have been. I'm assuming we would have gotten the rematch from WrestleMania 12 at WrestleMania 13. Maybe Bret wins that match, and then we've got kind of the third match at some point. I don't know if it's SummerSlam or when it takes place, but it would have been fun to see that whole thing play out. But instead, we kind of got robbed of that because of behind the scenes stuff and never really got to see that feud play out. We just got that Montreal screw job. And while it was certainly infamous, it wasn't necessarily the best match we could have gotten out of those two. Also, Jeff, this is wild, but including the dark matches on this show, let me run down who the crowd in West Palm Beach got to see wrestle, okay? By my count, there's at least 12 future Hall of Famers that wrestled either during the televised pay-per-view or during the dark matches. And here's who we had. The Rock, Owen Hart, the British Bulldog, Triple H, The Undertaker, Terry Gordy, who was working as the executioner against The Undertaker, who was also on that show, Sid, Bret Hart, Steve Austin, Goldust, Shawn Michaels, Mankind. That's 12 current or future Hall of Famers. And there might even be one or two also on that show. So at least 12 on one show in 96. It's incredible. So obviously the booking wasn't necessarily the best at this time, but man, the talent was there and that crowd got to see it. A couple other things going on in the business. Starting on January 4th, the WWF would be launching Shotgun Saturday Night, which, if you remember, was in different night spots in New York City. I mean, they had one at like Penn Station and they had them at these nightclubs. And I actually thought it was really cool and something different. And it was definitely like an edgier product that they were putting on their shows. I was ashamed that that kind of went away. I would assume that the logistics and the production of it was a real pain in the ass, but that was a lot of fun. Obviously, Sid's the champion. So with that comes certain responsibilities, such as the Royal Rumble press conference. It turns out that in his first big duty as champion, he would sleep through his alarm and miss that appearance. So he was dinged with a $1,000 fine. I'm sure that really taught him a good lesson. ECW's fighting to get on pay-per-view. The speculation was they were not going to be able to get on because both Request TV and Viewer's Choice said they were too extreme. So they're still fighting and ultimately win that battle. Also, in some ratings news, so this pay-per-view obviously takes place in the middle of December. Now, the two Raws following it just did poor ratings, but the second of those two, this December 23rd spot, obviously rough point with the holidays, but it does a 1.5 rating, which was a 34% drop from their rating a week earlier. So they're really, really struggling in the ratings. And if you look at some of the booking and some of the things going on in still some of that cartoonish era, mid-90s WWF stuff, it's no wonder why, especially when you look at what their competition was doing with the NWO, with Hogan and Piper and Sting and Flair. I mean, they just had so much going on there that they were just kicking the WWF's ass. So with that being said, we've covered the show. We've covered what was going on in the business. But each week, Jeff, you give us a great build from a storyline standpoint and the careers of those involved. So walk us through the fake Razor and fake Diesel and how we ultimately got to this tag team title match at In Your House 12.
Yeah, we'll start with our guest, Rick Bogner. He actually made his WWF debut in September of 1996. But prior to that, he worked in a few other promotions, really dating back almost 10 years prior to that, 1988, 8 years. For most of that time, he was known as Big Titan. He did have a short stint in ECW. It was a little bit during that. He was known as the Slice and Dice Ramirez. It was really a parody of Razor Ramon more than anything. But some of the reports I was reading, like Paul Heyman said he had a guy that could do a decent and good Razor Ramon. And so that was enough for Vince. And so he got the call to WWF, and he actually canceled part of a scheduled tour that he was going to be doing in Japan in order to go over to WWF. You know, most all wrestling fans know that Scott Hall is Razor Ramon. And at this time, he and Kevin Nash were out the door for WCW. Scott Hall showed up on WCW TV in late May of that year, 1996, and then Nash arrived just a few weeks later. I say fake Diesel started with Jim Ross stating that Razor and Diesel would soon be returning to WWF. It was really endless how every week he talked about it. And then they even had, as Tom said a little bit, and we'll talk about more, had fans going to the 900 number to get more information on the storyline and what was happening. Fans knew, though, that whoever was coming, it was not going to be Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, Razor, and Diesel, because they had just left WCW. And at this time, this was in the heart of the Monday Night Wars, and WWF was just getting destroyed by WCW. So there was that piece of it, but then also, you know, that pesky little thing called contracts. So they had left, and that was that. Jim Ross, though, that he was saying that this is from his quote, most trusted sources. And so I believed him. That was the case. Now, adding a whole nother layer to this, Eric Bischoff went on TV and said that Hall and Nash are under contract with WCW and they aren't going anywhere. He really fanned the flames of the Monday Night War by saying it was a ratings grab because WWF was getting beaten so badly, and that, as he put it, the quote, "it is an idea that is blowing up in Vince McMahon's face," end quote. I think we can agree with that. I think he was probably pretty spot on that. So, you know, reading through, and we'll reference this a little bit throughout the episode, that issue of the PW Torch reports that they pointed out that, quote, "Diesel and Razor Ramon are character names owned by the WWF. Ross was careful to not say that Scott Hall and Kevin Nash were actually returning. Hall and Nash, who were unaware of the comments ahead of time, had neither any plans nor even the ability to jump back to the WWF. In fact, the night of the announcement by Ross, Hall and Nash were wrestling for WCW at a house show," end quote. So WWF, of course, owned the names. So WCW announcers at the time had to refer to them as the two, you know who they are. And then eventually they went with the outsiders. And then the best solution, being the easiest solution, eventually just started calling them Kevin Nash and Scott Hall. So that's how that was playing out at that time. So WWF, they were just oddly pushing JR into this heel role at the time by having him get teased about this announcement that just was not coming to fruition. And then finally, in late September, he cut a promo where he was just going off about being fired and having to tell his wife and kids. And so finally he brought out, air quotes, Razor Ramon. The JR part of the angle was dropped pretty quick. If anything, that was a sign of what was to come, because the fans were just not receptive to that angle of this and really all of this. I went back and watched that promo because even they are trying to convince us that this was the real deal. Like, if they were trying to convince us of that, commentary said, wait, that's not the original. And then they kind of trailed off. I don't even think they knew what they were supposed to do. And then just before it too, they made the comment, it's quote, and Hershey Park Arena explodes as Razor was coming out. So they definitely did not explode. They may have popped a little bit for the music, but then it went pretty quiet, no crowd mic muting needed. And so, as much as we complain about the announcers nowadays and commentary, this was just off the charts bad. I wish I had just more to the story and how we got this match itself. But in reality, the two, I say fake Razor and fake Diesel, they just didn't wrestle much ahead of this. They did it some house shows, but we just ended up with them getting Owen Hart and the British Bulldog for the tag titles. There was definitely a TV ratings factor in the push for these two, but the match itself got some heat. I felt like it was just generated in the promo just before the match. And it was really just, in my opinion, like just an incredibly short on-screen build. So, Tom, I say a lot of weird stuff happening backstage, a very short period where these guys were even on TV on the front stage, but I know you got a few things. So what else do you have?
Yeah, it's different than some of the builds for the other matches we've talked about, but it's more of what was happening behind the scenes and just all the chaos more than the build for the actual match. So the drama's there. It's just there in the wrong ways and for the wrong reasons. But one thing I came across in my research, Jeff, do you know why Razor was getting booed so much during this run?
Oh, I meant to time you and see how long it took you before the joke. But no, Tom, I don't know. Why was he getting booed so much?
Well, because he's the bad guy.
That's probably one of your worst ones. That's okay, though. Like, I got it. But
so you mentioned the JR promos. I went back and watched them earlier today. Here's what's weird, okay, is he's trying to be a heel, but he's talking about how he had Bell's palsy. He was fired by Vince McMahon. He had to wear a toga at WrestleMania 9, his debut. So you're not coming across as a heel. People want to cheer for you, right? Like, you're coming across as a sympathetic baby face. So it was weird because, like, he was trying to act like a heel and he's really angry and the tone of his voice is way different, but everything he's saying is getting him sympathy and you want to cheer the guy. So it just wasn't well executed. I also thought it was interesting hearing him saying Mr. McMahon, because keep in mind, this is well over a year before we ever saw that character, which we got following the Montreal screw job. So just a weird time in the business because we're like not at the Attitude Era and the edgy stuff yet, but we're starting to get some of it. But then we still have like cartoonish elements like these. So it's just a little weird. Now, also, you mentioned the 900 line. For you kids listening, they're too young to know about this. The 900 line was a hotline that WWF, WCW, and ECW all had. And so they all had their own 900 line. And in their own ways, they would all give basically a sales pitch. Like Gene Okerlund famously did the WCW one for a while. But they would give this sales pitch on, if you want to find out X, Y, and Z, call into the 900 line. And then in the small print at the bottom, 900 line would be like, I don't know, $4.99 a minute or something. So it was not cheap to call in. Okay. All three companies had them and they were actually a legitimate revenue source. So they'd always be talking shit about the other companies and what was going on. And this guy's contract is up. And I mean, people called in, it worked. So they were always on the shows whenever you'd watch. And this was the only time I actually called in. This call probably cost me $10, $15, $20. I don't even know. And it's probably double that in today's money. So what now would cost a couple months worth of the WWE network, I, as a 12-year-old, was calling into this 900 number for some bogus worked story, and my mom had to pay for it. So I went back and found the transcript from this 900 line the night I called into it. And I mean, this stuff's just so ridiculous, right? So it's Jim Ross, and he's saying, I had some very reliable sources that I do trust impeccably who said Diesel and Ramon are coming back to the WWF. Over the years here in broadcasting wrestling, there are a lot of sources you take with a grain of salt and others that are reliable. This is a reliable source. He would also say, and I quote, Diesel and Razor will be back on WWF television before the end of this very month. If you don't want to believe me, that's your prerogative. But I'm going to say with this story, I broke this story. I'm hanging my reputation, so to speak, on it. I really believe the things I'm saying will happen. Time will tell. And he'd go on to say all kinds of other stuff and this and that. It's just absolutely ridiculous, Jeff. So, with that being said, I think we've set the stage for what was going on. For those of you that want to watch this match along with our guest, Rick Bogner, we're at the 18-minute mark of the December 1996 In Your House. So again, after the break, when you hear the ding, 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 December 1996, In Your House, we're at the 18-minute mark if you'd like to watch this. So with that being said, it's time for the payoff.
Ho! It's time for the payoff.
All right, so here we are In Your House, and you're about to come down the ramp. So we covered a lot of this about you and your background in some previous interviews, so I really want to focus on this run. And I've heard you say it before, and I'll repeat it. We do not use the F word here, the F-A-K-E. We refer you as the second Razor. Is that correct?
That's preferred, yeah.
So tell us, as you're walking down the ring here, first of all, how much did you have to change your look to do this?
Well, funny you said that, because you can see here I don't have a belly on me. I'm not ripped or anything, but I was pretty bulky in those Japan matches we watched earlier, and even big in the stomach. But they admired sumo wrestlers in Japan, so you could be bulky and a little bit chubby, you know. They appreciated that. They saw the strength and the girth in that too. But here, Jim Ross had actually phoned me, and my phone's ringing at 6 a.m. And I was bouncing, and I was wrestling in Japan, and always up late, actually wrestling in WWF at this time, and still always up kind of late, you know, with the matches, and you go out or even just finding a hotel and eating. And so my phone's ringing at 6 a.m. and I'm like, who the hell is this? Phoning me at 6 a.m. Don't they know any better? And it was Jim Ross, and he's like, hey, Rick, we just got to tell you that we want you to look a little more like Razor. So before this next pay-per-view, and that was about 2.5, 3 weeks away, we want you to lose about 30, 40 pounds. And I was like, holy crap. So I went to the gym every morning on an empty stomach first thing, caffeine pill, ephedrine pill, and maybe a couple more cups of coffee, and did the treadmill or the cross trainer for about 45 minutes to an hour every single morning leading up to this match here, and lost about 30, 35 pounds.
Yeah, you know, we did that in some other episodes, your stuff in Japan, but man, you were a fantastic big man worker and flying around. It was fantastic stuff, but certainly noticeably thinner here. So who contacted you to do this run? What was that process like?
Well, Bret Hart had originally gotten me in as Rick Titan, and I worked with this guy named Frank Stiletto and met him in the locker room. And I said, so Frank, what would you like to do? And he was, you know, what you typically call a jobber. He lost pretty much every match, and he was fine with it. He just was happy to have a spot in the WWF. I mean, even getting there is very difficult on your own merit, on your own athletic ability, but politics as well. Politics are huge. So I've been chatting with Bret Hart for a couple of years, and I'd gone to Germany by this point, and he suggested that I do go there. And man, Owen and Dave, you look short compared to Glenn and I there.
No kidding. So did you want to do the run? When you heard the idea, when it was pitched to you, did you say, oh, yeah, sure, I'll do it? Or were you reluctant? Or did you just have to say yes because it was the WWF?
That's pretty much it. So I did the Rick Titan match with Frank Stiletto. I kind of beat the crap out of him. Not hurt him or anything, punched him in the face or anything like that, but laid it in, threw him down hard, powerbombed him really stiff, and really got myself over. And it was a dark match. Then I was supposed to wrestle, I think, one of the Smothers brothers. Vader went too long. God bless his soul. He was a great guy, Leon White. and we ended up not having that match. The referee or the talent scout who had seen me do the Slice and Dice Ramirez thing in ECW told Vince about me doing that. So I get a call 2 weeks later, and I think 2 weeks has gone by. I'd just gotten back from the gym. I was kind of down because I thought I'd get into the WWF at the time and was really hoping I would. And Brett had some pull. And so I get this message on my voice. It was one of those old answering machines, those plastic things, press the button. Hello, Rick, this is Vince McMahon. Could you please call me at my home at your earliest convenience? And I was like, wow, this is awesome, right? I thought I got in as Rick Titan. And then he starts talking to me. He says, the people want Razor Ramon back. And I own the trademark and the copyright and the costume. And I want you to be my new Razor Ramon. And I heard you do a fantastic Razor Ramon. He just kept going and it kind of sold me on it. And I'd been going to Japan for, look at that, Glenn just powering him up. Owen and Glenn mistimed it and misdistanced a little bit. And then Glenn just shoved his hands underneath him and pressed him up overhand anyways.
Man, was he a monster. I mean, did you see the potential in him even at this time? I know he was a little greener than you at this point.
Yeah, well, he knew the American style better than I did, the psychology better at this point, too. I knew Japanese style more, and I had to really slow it down for this character. I mean, you saw Big Titan was go, 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 beat the crap out of him, throw him here, throw him there. Here, it's like casually saunter around, throw a little punch, take your time, measure up, throw another punch. Come on, man.
Those Japanese matches we watched you, and you guys didn't stop. There might be a rest hold once a match, but you guys were just go, go, go for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And now you're doing the mannerisms and doing the whole Razor thing. I mean, what a difference. Did you have any idea Glenn would go on to be as successful as he did? Did you see the potential in him?
Yeah, I did. I figured they were going to do something more with him, more likely than with me. But Brett had that big falling out with Vince around that time too. And a lot of guys that Brett had brought in didn't really last past their 1 year contract. And Glenn had already been there as Isaac Yankem and then as Diesel. So you kind of knew they were going to try and work on something with him. I would have loved it if they'd brought me in with a mask too, but it might have been a little too obvious, Razor and Diesel and then Kane and whoever. But, again, it's really political. So I was under a 1 year contract that ran up. It didn't get renewed. And then they brought him back in as Kane. They brought him back in as a Unabomber in USWA, who he had done in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, I think. So he was wearing a hockey mask, a red and black hockey mask there. And there's Stone Cold. I worked with him once. It was a pretty slow match. I think he wanted to keep it to the mat and not get injured. And it wasn't the most exciting match in the world. But, he was a big guy, really, really strong guy, good athlete, methodical, could put things together, knew how to put a good match together, knew the psychology. So I pretty much knew he was going to go places. Yeah.
So the mannerisms, obviously you're working throughout the match. I mean, I'm watching you do the kicks right now. Did you watch tape? Did someone teach you how to do it? I think someone had maybe taught you how to do the punch, but tell us about that.
Yeah, I got sent videotapes before I went there.
Well, it's got to be tough to change your mannerisms. I mean, it's one thing to be a different character, but I mean, you're kicking and punching a way different way.
Yeah, you had to undo everything you'd learned and all the really realistic, strong style Japanese and really loosen up. I mean, I had to loosen up even the selling things here. It was loose and floppy, I was used to tight, rigid, and fast. That clothesline, my arm was all floppy and loose. The hey, come on stuff. We wouldn't waste time in Japan. It'd just be, grab them, shoot them in, do something else, and a little more devastating. And I was limited. I didn't know all of Scott Hall's moves. So I was throwing some of my own in there and mixing it up. There's a forearm shot, and I think...
How smooth was Owen?
Oh, he was smooth, man. He was great to work with. Yeah, it was just everything here. You can see our timing and distancing and et cetera. It just... like a dance. It was great.
How much prep went into this match? Did you guys call it in the ring? Did you have a lot planned out? Who's kind of quarterbacking this?
It was really mostly Owen backstage. I think we kept getting interrupted, so we'd have to come back to it and then call a few more spots. But the nice part about calling almost everything but backstage is that there are not really many surprises. And if you don't know, here comes the paintbrush across the head. I don't think they wanted to really put us over, especially me for some reason. Glenn had already been there for a while. But I heard rumor that we were supposed to win the tag team titles and that Davey really got choked and didn't want to give them up to us. And
at this match?
Yeah. Now, if they gave us the tag team titles, we would have had a really good run, and we could have even evolved the characters and probably moved on from there. And we were starting to get some heat. Like at first, we just got the boos and you suck and Razor sucks, Diesel sucks, and Scott Hall would kick your ass and all that stuff, right? But after a while, I think people started actually calling us Razor and Diesel and giving us boos for cheating and real heat, you know?
Well, if folks have the sound on during this match, and I did when I watched it before our conversation, I mean, the fans are, they're into this match. You guys are getting heat. I mean, there's a lot of sound in here, so it's easy to say, oh, these two imposters, whatever. But, man, the fans were starting to get into it. You know, this is, I guess, a couple months into this run as you're doing your stuff here.
Yeah.
So when you made your debut, I mean, were you thinking, look, this thing might have a couple years of legs, or did you think maybe 6 months? What was your gut feeling when you walked out for the first time and started this whole thing?
It was a pretty horrible feeling the first time. I mean, for one, they permed my hair so it looked like a short poodle. It was terrible. You know, they made us do it. Same with Glenn. His hair looked just ridiculous. It was like a tight perm. And then they dyed his goatee even darker because he's got naturally reddish hair.
When you have a great story, talk about him with the sunglasses the first time he came out.
Yeah. We're walking out and they made him wear Ray-Bans, really, really dark Ray-Bans. And the lights are really bright. It's hard to see coming out there when the lights are flashing as it is, you know. So he's got these Ray-Bans on. He's trying to walk out all cool and everything. He puts his hand on my shoulder, which is kind of weird because you don't do that really as tag team partners. And he says, Rick, I got to put my hand on you, man, because I can't see a effing thing. And I was trying not to laugh, you know, and he did it half as a joke too. And I'm walking to the ring trying not to smile too much or break out into a laugh as we're trying to stay in character there. But yeah, he was a pretty funny guy sometimes.
So when you first came in, was Vince super hands-on with this and producing everything and talking to you, or were you working with somebody else?
Yeah, he brought us in probably a week early into Stamford, Connecticut, into the training ring. And he actually taught me how to do the Razor walk and how to loosen up. And there were probably 3 guys in there. Jim Cornette maybe said a few things. And I always say that he gives himself way too much credit because he says he's the one that taught me how to do the walk. But I literally remember Vince McMahon saying, you got to walk as if your knees are on hinges. And it still sticks in my head. So that walk, that loosey-goosey kind of walk towards the ring, even the brush off on the edge of the ring and stepping through the ropes, I imagine that I had hinges on my knees the whole time that they could just flop over. So Davey was so strong. He picked me up.
What was he like working with him?
He was smooth too. He really just wanted to get himself over, though. I don't think he had much respect for this character either. But that suplex there, I didn't even bend my knees. Usually they push you down, you bend your knees, you jump, they lift you for a high suplex. He didn't even let me bend my knees. He just went, thump, and there I was up in the air. I went, holy crap, upside down, totally disoriented, didn't know where I was.
And what was your height and weight at this point?
I was 6'6", and I'm probably about 275 there.
And you said that your quads were so big that the Razor tights didn't even fit?
Yeah, you know, it's funny because Scott Hall kind of insulted me one time, and it doesn't really matter at this point, but he said, yeah, he was too fat to get the old Razor trunks on. Here's another one with Davey. He threw me up on his shoulder like I was nothing. I didn't even know where I was until I was up there for a couple of seconds. And his running power slam. Here's the
Razor's
finish.
edge.
Yeah.
And watch the crowd. Yeah, they pop for this thing.
Look how happy they
match. Are. Yeah, you guys went 12, 14 minutes, whatever it was, and it was smooth. It was moving the whole time. It was a great match.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. You know, if I could say this may have been my favorite match of all time. Maybe one with Mike Awesome, maybe one with Sabu. It's sort of a triple tie in there because Sabu and I worked really hard together, and there's a match in ECW. It's hard to find, but it's online. And then there's the one, I think a guy's got them for sale online, and he sent me a DVD, and I'm going to see if I can get it switched over so I can get it online. But it was me versus Mike Awesome, and Team Canada was together, and he was part of Team Canada, and he sort of turned heel on me and turned. And so we had these 3 matches, and I lost 2. And if I lost the last one, Team Canada would disband, and Ricky Fuji was part of it because he lived in Canada for a long time. So there's that big angle with Stone Cold Steve Austin Bret Hart and the whole Hart family, and he's taken out all their knees, right?
At this point, did you know this guy was going to be the star? Did you see it at this point?
Oh, yeah, he was already well on his way there. And just making him nasty like that, taking out everybody's knees and them selling it like that, it's just a dirty trick, right? So
yeah, and if you watch Davey Boy walk back here in a second, I mean, he's selling it.
Oh, yeah.
A little more than he sold your stuff.
Yeah.
Tell everyone, have you ever spoken to Scott Hall before?
No, I haven't. No. So the finishing that story there, he said that I was too fat to fit into his trunks because a couple of the girls backstage who made the costumes said, well, we might have a couple extra colors for you. I said, sure. But I was squatting 5 plates aside. That's about 500 pounds. And my quads were huge. And as you saw in the Japan videos, my legs were bulging in the hamstrings and in the quads. I couldn't get them past my hamstrings and my quads to his little trunks there, you know. Plus I was 6'6", and he was probably about 6'3", maybe 6'4", and I was at the time probably about 280, and you know, I don't know if he was much more than 230 or so. Yeah. So yeah, I couldn't fit the trunks on. It was too bad. I would have liked a few more colors.
So at this point, Sean, Hunter, 1, 2, 3 Kid, and I guess they were kind of buddies with Aldo Montoya. They're left in the company. Did you have any heat with them, any conversations with them at all?
Yeah, everything was pretty cool. I roomed with Hunter a little bit. He wasn't bad. He wasn't great. Sean was fine. He had his moods. If he didn't have his food served properly, like all egg whites in the morning, he had a fit on one of the waitresses. I remember that. But he actually taught me really well how to measure up first and then throw that floppy razor punch. He walked over. He says, hey, man, if you don't mind a little constructive criticism, this is how Scott used to throw the punch. And I said, yeah, sure. And I knew that him and Brett had a little bit of heat. So I was really surprised. Like, I was like, sure, you know. Yeah, and he showed me how to do it. And I threw it a lot better because of that. And that was just really, really cool of him, you know.
When you were around Triple H, is there anything that made you think, hey, this guy's going to be in the office someday? This guy looks at the business differently. He's got a different mind for it. What were your impression of him in 1996?
You know, he was Hunter Hearst Helmsley. I didn't think he'd be much different than the character that him and Steven Regal had brought out as a snobbish British kind of a character. And I thought maybe mid-card mainstay or something. He kept to himself a lot. He'd bring a book to the arenas. You'd always see him sitting in a corner reading somewhere, which I respect now. Looking back on it, I thought, geez, why is this guy always reading? When I look back at me, it would have been good if I was reading a little bit more during those years, but I think I've made up for it. I read lots still every day now, but I didn't really see the potential. But, you know, you look at physique-wise and weight gain-wise and then experience-wise and turning from a heel to a babyface to a heel and learning angles and maybe having the right political ins with the office. Some personalities really get along well. Maybe him and Vince just had a little bit of a click along too and had some good conversation. You don't really know what could be underneath it all. But there's also the point where you turn from, you know, you had some decent arms and some full pecs and a kind of a wide back into this massive, gigantic frickin' monster within a couple of years. I'm sure that didn't hurt either.
So you wrapped up this run working at the Rumble. Tell us a little bit about how that works. I mean, you know, when you're coming out, is it just, hey, this guy's going to toss you out around this point and just knock yourself out while you're in there? How much planning at that point, you know, that would have been Royal Rumble 97. How much went into that for you?
I was supposed to actually get thrown out a lot later originally and pitch a couple more guys out, get a little more heat, you know, as debates go behind locker rooms. And I don't know if it's the boys complaining or agents disagreeing or maybe saying, well, his character's not going to get over because he's a fake Razor and all that. So let's just get him out of there with Ahmed Johnson. So I got pitched out earlier and I was supposed to pitch out a couple more guys. It wasn't a great feeling. I can't say that there was much good wrestling. And I never was a big fan of doing battle royals or things like that, even when I was green, because you can't show off what you're made of or do running the ropes or anything flying or, you know, get really aggressive or press anyone overhead. There's just too many guys and too tight of a circumference. And then people are watching different wrestlers all at the same time too. they're not necessarily watching you. It's almost like, what's the point of showing my best when hardly anybody's watching me? I never enjoyed those kinds of matches.
And then after that run, I guess they let your contract expire. Did you ever have discussions or think there was the opportunity to come back repackaged with a different gimmick?
Well, in the very beginning, when Vince asked me to be the new Razor Ramon, I said, well, can we call me Razor something else? Or I said I had an idea for an Antonio Banderas. I can't remember the name of the movie right now, but he was a gunslinger and he had long pants and really long hair, and he was just a shoot 'em up kind of a guy and out to get vengeance, against really dirty, nasty Mexican guys. And I thought that would be kind of a neat character to be running around getting vengeance, grow my hair longer again, and get long pants and shift the character, even shift the name or something, or just cut it short to Razor. I don't know. I had a few different ideas. I said, could we evolve the character eventually? And Vince, of course, said, oh, yeah, of course. And that didn't happen. The last call I had was I knew my contract was running up, and I called Vince at his home number, which he had given me originally. Please call me at my home number at your earliest convenience before I started. And then I called him up just before my contract was up, and I said, so, hey, it's Rick Bognar here from Calgary, and I was wondering, my contract's running up soon. Is there something we can do with my character or a different run? All he said was, Rick, please don't call me at this number again, and click, hung up.
So I had heard that story from someone else on a podcast, and I didn't want to ask you about it, but it is a pretty funny story.
Yeah, it wasn't very funny at the time. All the blood on my face.
we can laugh about it 22 years later, right?
Yeah.
And look, I'll tell you, we watched some of these matches from Japan you had. We watched you in the ring there. I mean, hell, you were bigger, tougher, faster, all in. You had more skill than 2/3 of the roster, 3/4 of the roster. And just, it's so much of it just seems, it's timing. It's, obviously the right gimmick, the right packaging. And it's a shame. If you look back, all right, so let's just, obviously you would have come in with something of a little bit better in terms of how they packaged you. But, assuming that you did come in with this Razor gimmick, how would you have booked it differently? Or what do you think could have been done to actually get that whole thing over?
Well, I think you have to give it more time and then, again, evolve the character. If we could have put long pants on, maybe cut the name short or changed it even, grown hair much longer, had different angles, different running storylines with some good baby faces. A lot of it was that the guys like Steve Austin, who was on a top guy run, didn't want to take any chances in the ring with a guy like me who he didn't know I'd been around for 6 years. I was just some green guy to him, and he wanted to hold me to the mat the majority of the match, down in a headlock takeover to arm bar down, and hardly any bumps, and we'll call it in the ring, kid. Well, okay, so you're going to call a bunch of stuff where I look like crap, you get over a little bit, and then you give me the stunner, and it's done. You can't get over. And if you get an opportunity to do some storylines with some good baby faces and change and evolve the character to more your own style, I could have sped it up again a little bit, changed it. We actually did. You can find it online where I was in USWA in Memphis, still getting paid by Vince. And we got rid of the old Razor vest and then had me as Rick Titan again, and the crowd was cheering, quite big. And they brought Diesel in, Glenn, under a mask, and I think they were calling him the Unabomber or something. And of course, everyone's going, that's Diesel. But it's funny, they weren't saying that's Isaac Yankem or that's Glenn or anything like that. Down south, it's a different mentality too, and they're a lot more accepting and a lot more fun, I think. And they love to cheer the good guy. They just love to cheer. They're a happy-go-lucky bunch more. New Yorkers were much more cynical, much more angry. And we did the majority of our work up in the Northeast U.S., and we got pissed on every night by New Yorkers pretty much. But if we had had the opportunity to do the circuit around and around and change the characters and then had some good storylines, I think it could have worked out.
Well, the interesting thing, too, is I was, looking at this era and just the build up to this match and what happened afterwards. You were in this really weird era because the cartoonish stuff had ended. The Attitude Era really wasn't there yet. So you were brought in as a cartoon, right? They couldn't figure out if you were a cartoon and a parody or, you were supposed to be these big, tough guys. It's before the Attitude Era. I'm watching this and thinking about everything that transpired, and I'm thinking, gosh, if they would have brought you in a little bit closer to the Attitude Era and just given you an edge, and you guys just been, real edgy, real assertive and said, look, we're bigger than them. We're younger than them. We're faster than them. Own the fact that it wasn't them, right? But just been edgy and just, flip off the fans and anything you could do to just be so over the top. I think you guys could have gotten like nuclear heat and they could have, given you that tag title run and you guys could have been on fire. But again, it was this, I don't know if you see it that way, but I just see it as this, is it a cartoon or is it real? Are they fake and better, or are they the real guys? And they just couldn't commit to anything. And part of it was the era couldn't really commit to anything.
Yeah, I kind of probably subconsciously thought about that before, but you got a really good point. Again, if they brought us in doing an angle like we saw with Steve Austin, where we're taking out somebody's knees or a whole group of guys' knees, or a feud with some guys and doing some really dirty tricks, or cheating to win a lot, this sneaky. Razor Ramon was a greasy, slimy character, right? If we could have played it off right, where I did some greasy, slimy move all the time, and then Glenn would jackknife him after that, and we cheat to win all the time, and I'd walk away laughing and smirking, something like that might have worked too. And you're right, timing-wise, it got really, really dark with that Attitude Era, and even Bret Hart had to change his whole character and whole demeanor, go back to those little small round sunglasses, and came out in a wheelchair and winked at the camera. Like, I'm a dirty scumbag and I got a little secret here for you. Ha ha. And you're right. The cartoon character stuff was just dying out. Even looking at the screen right now with the Nation of Domination, that was some pretty serious stuff. These guys looked like jailbirds. And I guess that's sort of the idea. Jamie Dundee there, I think they used a hubcap, and they looked like the kind of guys that would steal a Mercedes-Benz symbol off the front of a car. They look like crooks. And so that was a big part of it. And same with WCW, with the NWO. Everyone's all of a sudden wearing black. It was a real dark era. And the cartoon characters were sort of, it never has been the same.
Yeah. So as you look back in your career, last two questions. First of all, and this has been great, by the way, really appreciate you joining us. Any regrets? Anything that you say, hey, you know what, I'd like a mulligan on this, or I'd like this back, or I wish I would have done this? If you look at everything in totality, what regret do you have, or what would you do differently?
Yeah, I don't think there was really a choice of doing anything differently. If I had said no to the Razor Ramon character, I think Vince is such a proud person that if you say no to him once, you're never going to get a second chance. And that was my dream for 10 years up to that point, to get into the WWF. And I wasn't going to turn it down.
Sure. And everything you did, Japan and Germany and everything in the States and Canada, what's the moment or the match or, the run that you're just most proud of? As you look back in your career, what do you think was the best thing that you ever did?
One of the most exciting things was wrestling in front of 50,000 fans in Kawasaki Stadium for FMW. That was spine tingling. Even talking about it to this day, my hair almost stands on end, because it's such an amazing feeling when 50,000 people are screaming, and it's like having speakers this high and the woofers and the tweeters are right in front of you, blasting you almost off the second rope, with the sound of the audience. That was just amazing. Something, you'll never feel again in your life, and very few people on the planet would ever feel. It's a real privilege. And then being tag team partners with Mike Awesome, our friendship, I think that was a really cool run too. And then just being in the WWE, I think here I was, a Canadian guy from Vancouver who just befriended some of the right people, including Bret Hart. And there were a lot of guys in Calgary. And if I were to make a list and ask a few people, there'd probably be about 100 to 150 guys in Calgary that had tryouts in WWE and never got a call back and never had the opportunity to be there. So, I had the chance to be there, and that's a once in a lifetime opportunity too. So if there were anything I could have done different, it would have been, and Chris Jericho and Lance Storm did this, send my videotapes out earlier. And you asked the question earlier, why didn't I do that? It's funny because when you're 23, 24, you think you need more experience and you're not ready yet. And you got to get bigger. You got to get stronger. You got to get more experience. And I knew that going to Germany would help me with that too. But if I were to turn back the clock, I would have sent stuff out when I was probably 21 or 22 just to keep sending it so they knew my name, they knew my face, they saw my physique and my athletic ability. That's one thing I would have done differently.
No, it's great. And I said that to you in another match we watched, but man, you were flying around the ring. You were young, you were tough, you were, a legit badass and had a great look. And it was a different time, so they didn't have scouts throughout the world and, people on every continent and YouTube clips and all this stuff. I mean, you couldn't quote unquote get yourself over or get seen the way you can now. And I think that if you were young in wrestling in 2019, I think you would have gotten found a lot quicker. And whether it was the Performance Center or whatever, they would have, maybe sharpened you up a little bit, but they would have had some plans for you because you were fantastic. So really appreciate you joining us. I think just great insight, great information. I know you do a lot of public speaking throughout Canada. So if someone in Canada is listening to this, tell them a little bit about the work you're doing now, how they can get a hold of you, the topics you're speaking on, because it's all over YouTube and it's really interesting stuff. And you've got a great story to tell.
Great, thanks. Well, they can find talks of mine on YouTube. Contact me at Rick Titan on Facebook or rick@ricktitan.com. And I talk about getting fired up. I've got a seminar called Fire It Up, and it's how to get self-motivated and how to get yourself psyched up to do the things that sometimes you don't want to do or you don't feel you have the confidence, so you can call upon that within you. There's actually a pond peaceful meditation I take people through so they can find that inner calm confidence, but then a loud yelling meditation part at the end so they can really blast off their minds before they're going ahead to do that and get themselves psyched up so it's a regular pattern. I mentioned neural pathways in the brain earlier. And you start carving these new neural pathways in, and they can be success pathways. I would suggest Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. I'll suggest different books to people. I take people through one-on-one coaching is one of my favorite things to do. I do that via Skype a lot as well, or could do it Zoom as we're doing right now. And then helping people to let go, detachment, a lot of Buddhist training, Hindu training, yogic philosophies, so versus yoga and just the asanas or the movements, which are relaxing. Yoga has what's called the 8 limbs of yoga, and I don't have time to get into the detail of that, but there's some great philosophies on how to train the mind. And in the training that I took for 4 years with a monk, we called it Lo Jong, which literally means the training of the mind. So the things that we're mentally clinging and grasping onto, like an old relationship or loss of money or loss of a job or so many different things. In my life, I lost that wrestling career. I broke my neck. There's loss of physicality there, loss of the money, loss of the career that I loved. It was really, really hard and painful to let go of. And depression can be part of it. So I help coach people to get past that and give them the Eastern philosophies, which are really quite indicative of how we think as North Americans and what we're taught growing up and how we still think in this rush, the practice of stillness and the practice of just being or being present so that you can be happier from moment to moment. I think is really important in life.
That's fantastic. Well, appreciate you sharing that. Appreciate you being on here. Check him out on YouTube. Go to his website. The coaching stuff's fantastic. And I know you could really help people through all your experiences. And I'd imagine that if you had an hour in front of a crowd, you'd have a great story to tell just about everything you've been through. You've seen the world. You've experienced life's ups and downs. You're doing fantastic now. So thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. Hopefully we can do it again sometime.
That sounds great. Thanks so much, Tom.
Thank you.
It's time for the aftermath.
So we got to thank Rick Bogner for joining us. We know he hasn't done just really a lot of interviews lately or really ever. So we're really happy he sat down with us and revisited this story because it is a crazy one, but it is a big part of his career. We have a show where we are supposed to talk about these matches, and I don't like the phrase, it is what it is, but this match, it is what it is. I have to give credit where credit is due. And no superstar, though, should be put in this position then, now, whenever, just to try and make something like this work, because it's not going to. It's one thing if you have like a wrestler that passes down his gimmick or character. I think Pentagon and the lineage that has, and then we now have Pentagon Jr. That's one thing, but no one could ever beat Razor Ramon. Same with Diesel. No one could ever be Diesel. I do wonder, hearing him and hearing about his career and doing some research on it, who knows if Big Titan could have just existed in the WWF, and what could have happened if we got that character and he didn't have to do this. I think that could have been, the what if, who knows. But this really was just, the characters were doomed from the moment the Hershey arena exploded. It wasn't going to happen. So, Tom, what'd you think of the payoff?
Well, I thought Rick was a fantastic guest. He shared a lot of great insight regarding the angle. It's certainly a good sport about it, considering it was more infamous than famous, if you will. The guy was a big bastard, man. He could work. If you want to see some fun stuff, go look up some of his work with Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling. It's known as FMW, or even some other stuff he did overseas. But like in FMW, he was a tag team partner and an adversary of Mike Awesome, who was known as the Gladiator there. They were both similar builds, similar styles, and I'm a huge Mike Awesome fan. I love the stuff he did in ECW and can't wait to cover him and one of his matches on a future episode. But again, those guys were pretty awesome together there. And so I think that with a different gimmick, to your point, Jeff, it's a whole different way of looking at this guy. So as far as the angle in general, I think the biggest issue is they just half-assed it. If you're going to do this, then do it 100%. Own it, go all the way with it. Don't do this, well, they're kind of real, but they're kind of not. And this is kind of a parody, but we kind of want you to take them seriously. Look, if I'm booking this and we're going to do this angle, then I'm bringing them in as massive heels. I'm getting them a ton of heel heat. I want them cutting promos saying, look, we're younger, we're faster, we're bigger, and we're tougher than those guys down south. And I think they could have gotten a decent run out of these guys as big heels for 6 months. Not main event, but mid-card, give them a tag title run, get them on the mic just cutting these promos, like making fun of the fans. I think you could have got these guys some real heat, but they just couldn't decide what they wanted this to be, obviously, both on camera and behind the scenes. So just a real messy situation. But I mean, look, we know the talent that the fake Diesel had, obviously, as a worker. And I think Rick Titan, same deal, man. I think he could have really been something special with a different gimmick. So the guys could work. It was just, to your point, Jeff, an impossible situation unless it was booked differently, which it wasn't. So let's talk about what happened with these guys following this match.
Yeah, we'll jump right in with the Owen Hart and the British Bulldog. They both kept battling with each other for the tag titles against a couple different opponents, the Road Warriors, a couple other ones mixed in there. They hit a storyline rough patch when Owen eliminated the Bulldog at the Royal Rumble in 1997. It had a little bit of back and forth, but it ended up giving us what I would call the classic 20-minute match between the two for the first ever European Championship. We might be discussing that one soon with a future guest, so of course keep checking back on that one. But they would battle, back and forth, like I said, a little bit, and then finally it was Bret Hart that used this as the catalyst to bring them together, stop fighting, think of the family, and they reformed the Hart Foundation, as we just talked about, recently. And so the gimmick, though, of, I say, fake Razor and fake Diesel, it just didn't last very long. And it fizzled after the Royal Rumble, which was that January of 97. So these guys were barely around for a few months. Razor, he was one of the first ones eliminated by Ahmed Johnson. Little piece of trivia there for you. Diesel was one of the last ones eliminated. So on the flip side to that. A few interesting reports that I read from the time was that the two of them had a few matches against the Godwins in December of 96, and the crowd would not stop chanting NWO through their match, and then also through a promo from Sid Vicious that followed that. So just was not going over well. Isaac Yankem, Fake Diesel, however you refer to him, Kane, hopefully, would go on, and he really had just incredible success with that character of Kane, who debuted in October of 97. A build, actually, that it started in that April. And so very long build before he actually showed up. As we all know, he cost The Undertaker his victory in the first ever Hell in a Cell match when he used The Undertaker's own move, the Tombstone Piledriver.
That's gotta be King!
I rewatched that again today just for the hell of it.
And how good was it?
Oh boy.
Is it one of the best debuts ever?
It's definitely one of the best debuts ever, but sometimes the commentary just needs to let the moment be the moment. And that was just, oh boy, that was raw. That was something. So Tom, I don't know about you, but we talk about his debut, keeping, the kayfabe alive. I was terrified when he debuted. Like that character, and I remember the story, and it was burned and all this other stuff. That was very good at the time. And so who knows if we'll ever get something like that again, but very, very good. So as for Bogner, his contract really expired and he was done. One of the stories I read online was that at the time, Vince McMahon would give his phone number, his home phone number, out to guys to call whenever they wanted, day or night, for ideas and things like that. And he hadn't been on TV for a while, and so he called Vince, and then Vince told him, "Don't ever call this number again." So kind of gives you an indication of how he felt at the time. Just one of those things. And after that, his contract expired. It was barely a year and he was gone. So he did end up going to New Japan after that, and he ended up hurting his neck. He had a few matches after that, but as he said in previous interviews, he just was not able to compete at the level he wanted to. And so because of that neck injury, his career really ended in early 1999 after that. So a lot happening, a lot of crazy. But Tom, what thoughts do you have on that?
Well, a couple things. So you mentioned what Rick would do afterwards, and it's just kind of fun. He was actually in the New Japan NWO faction while he was over there. Look, you're not always going to hit a home run, as Bruce Pritchard would say. Okay, and he has a good quote here. He said, "Look, hindsight's 20/20. You can look at it and go, boy, that sucked. But at the time, legally, you have something to prove: your own trademarks, your own names, your own character likeness. You created it. We created Razor and Diesel. They didn't. We owned it. We put the investment into those characters, and now they're capitalizing on that investment that we put in. It's just more of you had to set an example. You had to set a precedent that you owned it. It wasn't necessarily the person portraying the character as it was the character that got over." So that's Bruce Pritchard's feeling on it. JR had a good quote as well, and I'll read this. "I was excited about it because it was something new. Again, thinking if I'm still going to go back to the commentary booth, I'm going to be a little bit more edgy and so forth, so on. It's all fine. But some of the things I said in the promo got cheered. So I don't know. It's like swimming upstream. I didn't mind trying it, but I sure as hell had no envisions whatsoever of becoming a quote-unquote heel manager. I'm not Jim Cornette or Bobby Heenan or Gary Hart or any of those great ones. I'm just not. That's not my skill set. So I just didn't feel good about stepping into that world, but that hadn't really been determined." So a couple interesting takes there. The other thing I'll just say is, who would have ever thought Glenn Jacobs would go on to have this incredible 20-year run, prominent role, making millions along the way, first ballot Hall of Famer in the business. For him to come back in such a big way after being cast as an evil dentist named Dr. Isaac Yankem, and then faking being Diesel, to have the stardom he had is just unbelievable. So, Jeff, I'm going to ask you a question I probably already know the answer to, but what did the newsletters have to say about this match?
But before that, I will say shout out to the people at StarCast that gave to his campaign just so that they got a Glenn Jacobs for mayor shirt. I did appreciate that, and the people that have that dedication. So speaks to the character and the person. So good on them. So we got some doozies here today. So I want to break these down a little bit and share parts of it. But I'll start with the Pro Wrestling Torch. We've discussed it a little bit already, but we'll get right into it. It said, quote, "The British Bulldog and Owen Hart defeated Diesel and Razor Ramon when Bulldog pinned Ramon at 10:25 to retain the WWF Tag Team titles. Ross said if Diesel and Ramon stuck to their game plan, they would win the titles. Kevin Kelly interviewed Bulldog and Owen before the match regarding Bulldog's lack of focus. The Torch continued talking about the match. Quote, Owen threw some weak-looking punches to Ramon's stomach as Ramon tagged out to Diesel. Diesel side-slammed Owen. Fans chanted, Diesel sucks. At 8:21, Owen began a babyface-style comeback and crawled to his corner to hot tag Bulldog at 8:45. Bulldog even played to the crowd a bit as he took care of both Diesel and Ramon. A four-way broke out at 9:40. Diesel caught Owen in midair, but Bulldog drop-kicked Owen, sending both Owen and Diesel over the top rope to the floor. In the ring, Bulldog set up Ramon for his running power slam finish, but Ramon slipped out of it and set up his Razor's Edge. Owen returned to the ring and hit Ramon with a running wheel kick. Bulldog then bridged Ramon for the pin. Austin attacked Bulldog during his victory celebration. Again, several officials held him back from doing further damage. The match itself wasn't bad. On the replay, they showed that Owen had a chance to stop Austin from hitting Bulldog, but Owen hesitated, end quote. They gave it 2.5 stars. The Wrestling Observer newsletter, they had some more tidbits on this one. It said, quote, Ramon looked pretty bad while Diesel looked at least passable. Hart and Smith were the faces and worked as the faces, with Hart getting heat put on him most of the match until hot tagging Smith at the finish. Match was okay, but the finish was real good, 2.25 stars. So when it's on there, we like to share it. Grapple, the app, it's free. Check it out. Grapple on 4 ratings is a 1.88 out of 5 stars. So I think these are good if you're looking at the match itself, like the overall kind of story. I will say the Owens kind of running wheel kick at the end, it actually did look pretty sweet. Like that I'll give him credit for. In regards to overall ratings, though, just nothing to brag about, nothing to really jump out at, it just doesn't stand out, doesn't jump out to me. And it was fine. As I said earlier, just it is what it is. So Tom, how about you?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the topic of this week's episode and really what I'm looking at when I give my payoff score is the angle in totality as opposed to this actual match. I thought this was a decent match. The fans were into it. It was pretty good. I don't love seeing Owen and Davey working as faces ever. They're heels in my mind. And so that's a little odd, but it was a good match, good finish. I liked it. But again, I think as we transition into payoff score, I'm looking at the payoff of the entire angle as opposed to just this one match. So with that being said, explain to everyone what the payoff score is, and then you can tell me if I have to go first or you have to go first on this one.
Yeah, this one, a good moment to kind of remind everyone how we do this, because we've hinted at it a little bit here that, we look at everything surrounding it. These write-ups only had in that moment and kind of what happened, but we have the ability to look back and kind of see what happened. So we do 1 through 10, and it's really based on, like we said, a little bit of everything: the build, the crowd, the commentary, the in-ring product, the aftermath, just, how it's viewed today after as long as this has been in existence, and just what we feel is important to the overall storytelling and drama. And that, that's pretty much it. It's just 2 fans are on a podcast and what we think of the match. And so Tom and I don't discuss this ahead of time, so we don't really know. And so that always adds a little bit of excitement potentially. But with that being said, Tom, I think it's your week to go first. So share your score, bud.
All right. So again, the actual match I thought was probably better than people would think. It was solid. There were elements of this whole angle that I thought may have had some potential. I mentioned it earlier, but I think you could have actually made these guys, I don't want to say monster heels, but I think you could have given them a pretty darn good mid-card heel run if you had really gone with it. They didn't. And so when I'm saying payoff score, again, I'm looking at the topic of this show being this entire angle, which I'm going to put at a 1.5. Okay, so my payoff to this entire angle is a 1.5, really for two reasons. Like, number one, they built it big, okay? So they had my 12-year-old ass call the 900 number and spend whatever to get worked. And so there was a lot of hype and a lot of TV time spent building this thing up. So the expectations were high, right? It wasn't like they just came out and interfered. I mean, they like hyped it and they made people call and they had the AOL abuzz. So given that how much emphasis they initially put into it and then how bad it actually was, that combination combined when something doesn't live up to the hype really hurts. So again, a 1.5 because yes, they were probably set up to fail. Yes, it was probably a bad idea, but even if it was a bad idea, it was executed very poorly as a bad idea. So for those reasons, I'm giving this a 1.5. Jeff, agree with me, disagree with me? What do you have?
You have to remember, buddy, we say it too. We text each other. We're getting worked. We're always getting worked. It doesn't matter when it is or what it is. We're getting worked. So part of the excitement with wrestling. So you've said it. I've said it. The situation that these guys were put in it's impossible. I gave it just a little bit higher because that booking is not their fault. And this was doomed from the moment creative thought of it. It's one of those ideas where, we might say like, oh, we want something outside of the box. Well, this was outside of the box. It really needed to be put back in the box. So, like you see commercials, you're like, how did that get past round whatever? Well, this is one of those, like, how did this get to this point? Here we are. So for me personally, I'm going to give it a 3 just because I actually thought like the match wasn't awful. It definitely wasn't good, but it was fine. Like I said, the kind of finish, and I was a huge Bulldog fan growing up actually. So appreciate that too. But just the situation they were put in, I say they made the most of what they were given, which wasn't much, but I just can't score it higher than that. I thought one interesting piece, though, that I took just from Wade Keller and his reporting really leading up to this, it was interesting. I'll just kind of read it in quote. In a bold innovation in promoting philosophy, within the next month, the WWF will be debuting a new Diesel, a new Razor Ramon, and even a new Double J, with the idea being to seriously promote them, not use them as mere parodies of the departed original wrestlers. When all is said and done, the WWF may end up with their own version of a New World Order type group, which consists of wrestlers taking on the likeness of discarded or departed characters. The WWF may hope this group, while different from the NWO, may capture some of the same TV ratings magic that NWO has created for WCW. Who knows if under different circumstances, maybe that could have worked. I think, Tom, that's a good one for you and I to cover on the after show. But I think that it's one of those things where it does make you stop for a minute. And maybe there could have been, maybe that's where the idea was, but then it just got so diluted. And, by the time it finally got to TV, and that was that. So who knows, but that's my score. I'm sticking to it. So Tom, you got any final thoughts on this one?
Just that if you don't remember this stuff or it's been a while since you saw it, and I'm guessing everyone will fall into one of those two categories, go watch at least some of the YouTube promos that are out there. It's just crazy. Like, that WCW's got the NWO stuff going on. So they've got this very reality-based, intense product. And then you see what they're putting on Raw, and it's like, no wonder the WWF was getting their ass kicked in the ratings. But if nothing else, Jeff, it's fun to see Glenn Jacobs with his hair dyed black and in a perm. He was a wacky diesel, man. So with that being said, I think this was a fun episode. It's definitely something that you probably don't remember or remember a lot about. So it's fun to dig into what was going on. I enjoyed this one. It's fun to look back on. And again, some days it's famous, some days it's infamous. This one's infamous. It was a good trip down memory lane of the fake Diesel and fake Razor angle. So with that being said, Jeff, let's wrap this one up and head to the finish.
You can't say you and I didn't have fun talking about this one. So that's for sure. But yeah, just a big thanks, Rick Bogner. Again, credit where credit's due. Can't ever put the blame on his feet for, this character and what happened, but infamous moment in wrestling history, but just really great to have him on and talking about this. And there was a lot more to his career. So like Tom said, check out some of that stuff because it is worth it. And, more than just this character. So thanks to him again. We could say at the start of the show, always end with it too. Subscribe to the Payoff. Give us those 5 stars. We're over 100, so keep them coming. We're super happy about that. So, less than 2 months, and we're just grinding away. And spread the word about the Payoff. That's how we're seeing, just more and more people coming to the show every week, every day, and we appreciate that. So we're always active on that social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram,
and over 600 followers on Twitter.
That's right. We did crack that. Yep. We're keeping moving forward, man.
And they're all actual real people that listen to the show.
Yeah, they're not some Russian bot. So we've got that going for us. So, but again, Twitter's one of them. Facebook, Instagram, you name it, at Payoff Pod. Tom and I too, at Payoff Tom, at Payoff Jeff. We're out there too. Engage a little bit differently on our own personal accounts. May talk about some current stuff, but we're always going to talk about stuff. So don't hesitate to reach out. Then, of course, that one tier, payoffpatreon.com. We keep it simple. We're going to bounce right into the after show after this. So if you want to check that out, make sure you're a Patreon subscriber. It's just that one tier and then weekly content. So, Tom, I'm going to kick it to you. I have nothing creative this week. I thought I would, but you know what? There was so much creativity spent on this character and this story that I'm out of it. So, Tom, I'm just going to kick it to you to close the show.
Or discussing this killed your creativity for the day.
Well, it might be some of that too. Who knows, man?
Well, as always, thank you for joining us on The Payoff.